session on cybersecurity in the age of COVID-19. We're very fortunate to have Jake here. If you were in the summer conference, he was a speaker then. Very engaging, very knowledgeable, an expert in the field of information technology and security. And this should be a great session. So Jake, thank you for coming, and we look forward to your session. If you're just joined us, the question and answer will be a great place for you to put comments or questions that you want Jake to see. The chat is more of a function for you to communicate with each other. All right, it's all you, Jake.
Great, thank you. I have a full screen view here, so I can't see the chat. So maybe if there are questions, I'm happy to take a minute and stop. So just stop me if you see something that folks are asking about. I'm happy to take a minute and respond to those. So thank you for asking me to come and join you again this year. I regret not being able to be there in person, but this is almost as good. So the topic I'm talking about is cybersecurity in the era of COVID-19. Certainly, COVID-19 has thrown a bit of a wrench into the works on this front, and let's explore that a little bit together. So my presentation has three parts. I want to give you a bit of insight into what the cybersecurity, space looked like as we entered 2020. Certainly at the end of last year, as I try to do every year, is take a bit of stock of where are we, what's emerging, what kind of trends are people seeing, and how does that influence the path that I set for our organization, as well as how I deal with my, my home setup or what have you. So I must apologize a little bit. My presentation has perhaps a bit of a corporate bent, but I think that you'll hopefully find some nuggets in there that will help you in your classroom and perhaps also in your home, ensuring that you're safe. So we'll take a little bit of a look at what did it look like before COVID. Then I want to talk about the impact of COVID-19. I'm going to show you some of the schemes and scams that are already emerging in the space. And we'll conclude with an overview of how to protect yourself in the new paradigm of working from home, which I suspect many of you will continue to be doing for the foreseeable future. So before COVID-19, so the approach that I've taken in kind of extracting the high-level trends, emerging issues, is to look at what the professionals are reporting. So these are the big reports that come out pretty well annually from the various space watchers, if I can call them that, on cybersecurity trends. And I've tried to distill from these reports kind of the themes, the high-level themes, the consistent issues that they all identified. And it's, again, not unsurprising to see a great deal of consistency among the various observers on what's really going on out there. So let's dig into that. The first big issue that many of the watchers I continue to identify as a growing risk is ransomware. Ransomware, I suspect many of you know what this is already. It's malware that gets installed on your computer, which encrypts your data and then extorts or tries to extort you, usually through the payment of Bitcoin, an amount of money upon the payment of which you will receive a key to unlock the data. It's a very aggressive form of cyber crime, but it's also very profitable. You're putting, in essence, a gun to an organization's head. Look, I've got all your data. You have no other way of getting it unless you decrypt, pay me and decrypt, and I'll provide you with the decryption key. So very successful, and as a result, it continues to grow. And still many organizations fail to take the steps necessary to mitigate this risk. Things like having a good backup in place is one of the first things you should have if you want to reduce the impact of a potential ransomware attack. So the general trends are that this is continuing to grow, very much focused on the smaller and medium enterprises. Larger, the Fortune 500s of the world have already taken steps to deal with this threat. They've got effective backup controls in place. They have mechanisms to spot within their networks and their systems activity that suggests that somebody's trying to encrypt files. So they're well positioned in many cases to deal with this. But the small and medium enterprises, the 10 to 50 employee organizations, the entrepreneurs in your communities, who simply haven't looked at this and are now being aggressively targeted. Their data is valuable too, and they do, in many cases, have money that these crooks would like to get their hands on. The primary vector through which these ransomware attacks are mediated are, of course, phishing and social engineering. 91% of all breaches start with a phishing attack. So someone clicking on an email in their inbox that redirects them to a malware installed through a compromised attachment, or a link where they try to steal credentials and the like. Ransomware is getting more sophisticated. There are new methodologies being developed by the bad guys that exploit remote management tools, people working from home or working remotely on servers, and how to exploit those to better get into systems. They're prioritizing encryption. So in other words, they will look for your backups first, or the data that is most critical first. A ransomware attack doesn't happen with they get into your system and encrypt right away. They'll usually now take a day or two to see what you have on your network, find the juicy files, make sure your backups are either disabled or are also encrypted, to make sure that they have optimal leverage when they come to you with their threat after the encryption has been completed. A good indicator of potential risk for ransomware is if your data or your organization's data is available on the dark web or has been compromised somehow. So they're actively looking for those organizations in those data sets to target. So that's ransomware, a growing threat in the space. Here's an example of another area, ransomware as a service, which I didn't mention in my previous slide. I just put this slide in because it was interesting. I read something about this a few days ago. One of the other aspects of ransomware that's growing is ransomware as a service. So there are, particularly in Russia, organizations that will provide you a ransomware kit that you can configure to your liking to target anyone you like. So basically, off-the-shelf ransomware creator tools that you can buy. So next, mobile is another emerging area of threat and risk. It's currently the #1 attack vector by the number of malware programs being created, literally thousands and thousands a day. Very much focused on the Android operating system. The iPhone platform is more secure and less susceptible to these kinds of attacks, and therefore sees fewer malware instances being created. But Android is a high-risk area, and if you have an Android phone, you want to make sure that you properly secure it. Credential stealing malware on phones is a big sector of this. So in trying to install apps or software on your phone that logs your keystrokes, tracks your credentials, your authentication on banking apps and the like, it is a high priority for these crooks. SIM jacking, this is another area in the mobile space that is growing. SIM jacking involves the crooks contacting your vendor, your phone vendor, under the guise that, look, I've lost my phone, or my SIM is no longer working, can you send me a new one under the same phone number? And getting that SIM then activated, in essence, enabling you the bad guy to get all the two-factor authentication messages, or to communicate by text message under your phone number. That is a growing area of concern. Fleeceware is also an area that many folks don't necessarily see as a cybersecurity threat, but it certainly is. Fleeceware, and I think I have an example on the next slide. This is an example of fleeceware. So you install an app on your phone, and you get a certain free trial, or you have opt-in options in the in the app for additional features. And sometimes it's not necessarily clear what the actual cost is. And because of the way that these stores are set up, some of this billing happens automatically once you install the app and it's authorized on your account. So you can see here, this particular Fortune Mirror app, it offers a 3-day free trial, and then it's $70 a week. That works out to a significant amount of money over the year, as you can see. This one's being to some degree quite transparent about the fees that are being charged. Others are not necessarily so, and hide this fleeceware in the actual user agreements, which is just, again, another reminder that we need to educate our users to read those user agreements and to be careful about the permissions we grant to apps in our mobile device when they install. Certainly Android does a good job, as does iOS, of alerting the user to additional permissions that you're giving when you install certain apps. You can disable it, but I would encourage everyone to make sure that that's enabled, so you can see what kind of permissions an app gets once it's installed. And you should consider very carefully whether a flashlight app, for instance, needs access to all your contacts and the like. Bring your own device risks in the mobile space is another area, more corporately focused. Lots of organizations are looking to allow people to use their own device, and that brings additional risks, of course, as well. Another area is cloud computing. Cloud computing is on the rise, particularly since COVID-19 has hit. The cloud usage is really growing aggressively now. And there are serious risks here as well. Not so much on the vendor side, but on consumers side of the fence. If folks buy a cloud solution and don't configure it properly, or don't educate their staff member who is responsible for administration properly, and that leaves loopholes in the security posture that can be exploited. So when you're going into a cloud environment, if your organization is looking to move to Office 365 or SharePoint or any of the other vendors out there, it's very important to make sure that folks are properly trained, and that particularly administrators on the cloud service have devices that are tightly controlled as well. So they shouldn't, have these devices at home or using them for other personal things and the like. End user training for cloud services, of course, also very important. Unsecured third-party user dependencies. So if you are allowing some of your suppliers to access your cloud instance for a particular reason, you want to make sure that they have controls in place to manage their risks as well. Again, this is a bit corporate, but hopefully of some interest to you. Here's a quick slide on the adoption of cloud usage. As I mentioned, cloud usage has significantly increased. This is, I think, a Flexera State of the Cloud Report 2020. And as you can see, significant higher than planned cloud usage as a result of COVID-19. So big numbers. And I don't think that that's going away. I think once people see the benefits of cloud usage, just the accessibility, the ability to stay up on new features without having to do anything in your systems is wonderful. And the cost, of course, in many cases, not having to have your own data center, being able to just plug in online to your system is a great benefit. Supply chains and third parties. Won't spend too much time on this one, really not that relevant to education, but I'm sure that education schools also have vendors and third parties they deal with. So this is something to think about. If you're bringing someone into your system and give them access to your computers, have you checked them? Have you verified that they're okay, that they've got systems in place to protect their systems that may be accessing your network? Fintech and open data. We've talked about fintech before. Fintech is certainly an area that is responding to COVID-19 as well. Lots of fintechs are going, mobile, and they traditionally were fueled by a mobile evolution as well. So this dovetails very nicely with, the reality that folks are working from home more. But there is a bit of a price to pay. Many of the fintech startups don't focus on security as kind of a first priority. They're focusing on getting their product to market, and security is in many cases an afterthought. So that poses risks for consumers. There are also risks with some of the open banking initiatives, data harvest, and misuse risks there. Yeah, won't spend too much more time on that one. AI, this is a very interesting trend, and to me personally, very interesting. You know, the ability to use artificial intelligence to better affect cybersecurity campaigns, to mimic legitimate activity has really escalated dramatically in the last number of years. I suspect some of you may have heard of deep fakes of videos. You know, they take a movie clip and substitute a new actor's face for an old actor in a movie, and it looks surprisingly real. Well, deepfakes can not only be done in videos, but they can also be done with audio. So I'll give you a scenario. Let's say you have a CEO in your organization who does regular speaking engagements, and there's audio available of him or her on the web. There are tools available to harvest that audio and, in essence, enable the creation of new sentences, new speech from a body of previously generated text. And you could use that to create fake voicemail messages, for example. Now think about that at scale. If you were to able to generate an email or a voicemail to an organization that sounded like the CEO, that told the users to, you know, do this, do that, or, you know, transfer money or do this, whatever you like, is a significant risk at scale. Think of an organization of 1,000 people that all get a voicemail from their CEO. There may be one or two people who jump on it right away and compromise the system in some way. So this is a very dangerous and evolving area of cybersecurity that we all need to be concerned about. You know, just because something is a video or is viewable doesn't mean it's necessarily real anymore. You know, the things that we believe by looking at a video when, you know, a picture is 1,000 words is no longer true. With really aggressive photoshopping capabilities, video editing capabilities, and this AI, it really becomes much more fertile ground for things like, you know, fake news or fake communications that can compromise your systems. So we need to breed a certain amount of skepticism in our users, to some degree even a bit of paranoia about these things, to ensure that we manage this risk effectively. Yeah, so this is very interesting, and I think an area where we're going to see ever more evolving threats in the cybersecurity space. Here's just a quick example. You can go to the link on the Verge website. I'll send around my slides afterward. But just Google deepfakes and look for the videos. There are lots of interesting examples that look very real. Yeah. Advanced persistent threats. So these are state-based actors, you know, Korea, Iran, Russia, North Korea, sorry, Iran, Russia, China to some degree, who have organized teams of people conducting these types of cybersecurity attacks, not necessarily for the same reasons as you know, the kind of corporate actor, if I can call it that. There are usually intentions to steal information, but in the case of North Korea, also attempts to make money. And these are very aggressive, well-funded, well-trained groups of people. If you get attacked or targeted by an APT, it's likely game over. Very sophisticated. Challenging to deal with, really no international standards with which to address them. And this is intensifying in some measure because of the threats that I've previously talked about. You know, AI is driving a lot of this stuff as well. And there are real risks, not just to individuals, but to our infrastructure, governments, international relations with these kinds of actors. So that is another threat that's identified in the various reports. The Internet of Things, this is something I suspect somewhat closer to home for those who are watching. You know, you're all likely aware of things like cameras in your home or light bulbs that you can turn on and off with your phone. Those kinds of things are the Internet of Things. And there really are billions of devices being added to the Internet, creating all kinds of new attack surfaces that can be exploited. There are examples of the microprocessors on cameras that are in the IoT space being exploited for botnet attacks. In the Internet of Things arena, most of the producers are not focused on security as a first deliverable. They're focused on product, and security is in many cases an afterthought. As a result, a number of jurisdictions are now responding by imposing obligations on these vendors to make security a priority. So mandatory patching, making it easy for the user to configure the system to update properly and persistently. And California is a leader there. So if you have devices like that in your home, there are risks that go with that, and we'll talk a little bit later about how you can mitigate some of those effectively. Here, just a quick example of the Internet of Things. This is a graph showing the growth in machine-to-machine connections. So when you and I connect on the Internet, it's a human to a machine. We interact, but there are ever-growing machine-to-machine connections in the various areas of our lives. And as you can see here, growth in this category is significant. If our portfolios had that kind of return, we'd all be very rich in a few years. Other developments, crime as a service is continuing to grow, particularly from Russian gangs who provide 24/7 support. They use cryptocurrencies to fund these services, and you can go to them and get them to create a malware campaign for you. I've mentioned this a little bit already. Cryptocurrencies, like I said, enable a lot of that. Issues within organizations, there's still a underfunding to deal with cybersecurity, a significant skills resource gap. I think the statistic a few years ago was that we would have millions of available positions in cybersecurity to be filled by 2020, and that has in fact turned out to be the case. If you have certification in cybersecurity and some IT training, you won't have any trouble getting a job in today's environment. There are lots of jobs out there. So encourage your students to take it up if they have a bent towards information technology or an interest in this space. Regulation is trying to catch up with all of this. You're probably not that interested in that, so I won't spend more time on that. So let's take a look now at COVID-19 and the impacts of that event, the significant event on the whole cybersecurity business, the cybersecurity space. So the government response, first of all, all over the world, we've seen states of emergency or other similar measures taking effect. Certainly in North America currently, I would think that most states, certainly in Canada, all provinces continue to remain in that state of emergency. And governments are disseminating information online, they're educating people online, they're trying to procure supplies, and they're using and developing tracking apps. I know a number of Canadian jurisdictions are actively developing apps to help spot reinfection clusters once the economy gets opened up again. I think Alberta has already implemented a tracking app, and I know here in New Brunswick we're looking at it as well. So these in essence work by using Bluetooth, and as you get near someone with a phone, they will put that person in your list, and if you get too close to them based on Bluetooth proximity, they might give a caution, and they'll also track a particular individual who's connected with more often, so that if you get infected, they have a way to identify those people who should be checked as a first priority. Government is also, of course, issuing financial relief programs. The reason I'm mentioning all of this is I want you to think about what this creates as far as new vectors for attack, and that's exactly what I'll talk about in a minute. But these changes, these government responses, are all creating opportunities for the bad guys to exploit, of course. Organizational impacts within business and certainly also within schools. We've had to deal with social distancing requirements. We can't do things the old way. We have to find new ways of getting done what we need to get done. Much less interaction in public, dramatic economic effects. I think the numbers for unemployment are due out today in your good country, and I think certainly in Canada, we've also felt the effects. And as a result, also, we have significant amount of employee fear, uncertainty about the future. All of those things, again, mitigate towards potential abilities to be exploited for gain by terribly bad people, really. So organizational responses, I suspect, certainly in my organizations, we've done all these things, had to act very quickly to get people working remotely. We had to leverage our IT systems. We had to look for new tools. We had to change the way we do things. We had to reorganize how we get information and data and services from others in many cases. We had to restructure how we work. Some organizations laid off people. And we had to really up our ante as far as communicating with our employees in a different paradigm. No longer you call a meeting and everyone's in the same room. You need to figure out how to get everyone together and communicate effectively using, in many cases, electronic tools now. Personal impacts. So I'm kind of going from the government round down to the person. Personally, we've all had to adjust to the new paradigm. Many people are anxious about these changes, particularly the impacts of the COVID-19 as a whole, financial impacts, health impacts. Our social mesh, our social interaction with others is disrupted. The water cooler opportunities to chat have disappeared. We've had to find new ways, and those have had impacts, of course. And certainly distraction and preoccupation, even while we're trying to work, are a factor. So as far as, in the personal space, our responses have been very much away from the personal interaction to the electronic interaction. The increase of social media use has dramatically increased. People are really searching for social connectivity online now. We're looking at different ways of finding the things we need, living needs. We're trying to also respond to government support offers and maybe deal with our lending associations or organizations as well, who are offering in many cases deferrals or delays in payments. So there's really quite a bit of upheaval going on at every level of our society, the governments, organizationally and personally. So in the context of cybersecurity, just to re-emphasize the point that I'm trying to make, before COVID-19, we had a bit of an equilibrium, a certain balance in our daily lives, in how we interacted, how we did our work, how we interacted with our technologies, how we did our work, our processes we followed, and the data that we're really concerned about in the cybersecurity space, that kind of is the product or the connecting item between those three things. So there's been disruption in each of these areas. How we use technologies has changed, our processes have changed, where people are has changed, but the data is still there, but there are cracks in this equilibrium that are now looking to be exploited. And it's those weakest links in those re-engineered systems that, of course, create the opportunities. All the things that I've talked about at the various levels that were responses or impacts, each one of those presents an opportunity for the cyber criminals to exploit. And I don't know if how many of you recognize these songs, but these are 4 songs that all have the same tune. The point that I'm making is that everything old is new again every time we have an event like this, or a new trend, or a new shiny gadget. The crooks find a way to take old ways of stealing your money and repurposing it for the event or the shiny object that is the current rage in society. The first one is actually, I think, written by Mozart, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway. So here's a couple of examples of the kinds of things that have already started to appear as soon as COVID-19 hit us here in North America. Socially engineering the fear. So emails suggesting that there are tools available that will help you identify if someone in your neighborhood has COVID-19. And the apps that will do these kinds of things are all the rage. And people are installing these things on their phones or following the links on the email because they're curious, they're distracted, they're anxious perhaps, and there's significant risks here. And again, note in this particular example that the actual URL that appears in the email looks legitimate, cdc.gov, but actually when you hover over the email, it's quite something different. Of course, that's one of the first things you'll want to do anytime you get an email that looks at all suspicious, is to hover and identify the URLs, the links in both the links in the email as well as where it's coming from. You'll notice here as well that the from email is actually not CDC at all. It's IPLOWLLC.com, which is likely a compromised server somewhere, or may have been created just for this purpose. Who knows? But a clear example of trying to exploit the fear, the anxiety of people as a result of COVID-19. Another avenue is to steal credentials. So anyone looking for information online about COVID-19, there are lots of spoofed domains out there. Statistic of interest perhaps for you: since January 1st, there have been over 250,000 new domain names registered relating to COVID-19. I doubt all of them are legitimate. In fact, the Cyber Threat Coalition, a group of cybersecurity professionals which have gotten together after COVID-19 to hold well over 3,000 professionals are actually actively scouring the web and building a blacklist. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these sites already doing these kinds of things. So the idea here is send a link around for people to get information and then steal their credentials, their work credentials or their personal credentials, and take it from there as far as using those to, take your banking information or otherwise compromise your digital assets. Here's another example. This is another CDC example urging you to log in with your established, Outlook, G Suite, Office 365 credentials. Again, many of these out there. These are particularly being targeted as well at public health organizations, hospitals. There was a recent compromise in Ontario of a hospital by these kinds of attacks, looking to, in that case, execute a ransomware attack. So freezing, encrypting the data of a hospital that is trying to do its best looking after its patients. How much of a bottom feeder do you have to be to feel okay about that? I don't get it, but there are people out there who do this. Financial relief smishing. So this is also very prevalent. You get a text message on your phone with a link. And this example here is from a few months ago in Canada. So the Canadian government offered a relief fund that you could apply for. So lots of people were getting these texts on their phone, and lots of people clicked on these things. And they tried to, of course, under the guise of applying for a relief payment, collect all kinds of personal information about you, including bank account information. Malware spreading via maps. I suspect some of you have seen this map. This is actually not the real map. This is corona-virus.map.com, which is a spoofed URL. If you actually go there now, you'll see that it's actually blocked if you have some security enabled. But there are lots of these, hundreds of these out there. And what they're trying to do is, as soon as you load this page, either install malware on your computer or steal your credentials in some way, shape, or form. So be on the lookout for that. Make sure you go to the right URL for these things and not a fake one. These, as I mentioned previously, the crime as a service, I think ransomware as a service is what I used as an example, but the Russian gangs are all over this. They have created a digital coronavirus infection kit that you can buy based on the Johns Hopkins map that you can buy for, what does it say, $700. and basically create your own website to start stealing people's credentials or install malware on their computers. So, you know, the threshold to get into this business, if I can call it that, is really quite low. If you know where to find this stuff, it's very easy to launch these kinds of websites and start stealing people's stuff. Mobile device malware, again, going back to the map functionality I talked about a moment ago, lots of these maps will allow you or ask you to install an app and thereby compromise your mobile device as well. Here, an example of a map that asks if you want to install the app to get more accurate reporting of infections near you, for example. This is the type of tracker that you would see in the application, and some of these buttons actually give you or surrender some of the access on your device to data on your device, or provide access to folders, what have you. So yeah, lots of exploitation of people's fears and curiosities about coronavirus, COVID-19. Internal account phishing is another ongoing threat. This certainly was present beforehand, but and this is an example of something we've seen in New Brunswick. You know, they've quickly retooled these types of internal account phishing, given the fact that governments are releasing a lot of their information online or digitally. So, you know, getting an email from a government official that says, you know, here are updates from the government is very attractive and is something that people are actually expecting to get. So there's already a certain amount of trust, and then you combine that with reduced vigilance because people are perhaps a bit anxious or distracted, and you can see how these kinds of attacks can be much more effective when we have something like COVID-19 going on. Keylogger Malware is another implementation of malware. I mentioned it previously. It basically tracks your keystrokes if it's successfully installed on your computer. And these are being, again, installed under the guise of coronavirus messages in the same vein as what I've just shown you. Fake video conferencing sites, lots of this going on, lots of registrations of domains with names that look very similar to what you might expect. So you can see here that we have Z, and then the O is a different form of an O, .com. And they've just put together a website that looks exactly like Zoom. So what they'll do is they'll send around links to someone who's waiting to join you for a session or an appointment for this, that, or the other thing. You click on it, and bada bing, bada boom, you've got malware installed on your computer as you're clicking on the pop-up that says we need to install the Zoom launcher or something like that, which you're in many cases comfortable clicking on if it was a legitimate video conference session. Bank loan deferral phishing schemes, of course, all the rage. These are blasted out to millions of folks, and you may end up getting lucky and having someone who actually has an account at the bank that you're touting as deferral, and people again, because of anxiety, expectation, and therefore a reduced risk barrier, if you will, click on these things. Terrible. Fraudulent fundraising, lots of that going on. People looking for money, appealing to your good graces to ask for money. The Nigerian prince reinvented for the purpose of helping the World Health Organization fight COVID-19. I've already talked about healthcare research organizations. Again, persistent healthcare workers with email scams, same idea. If you think creatively about how these weaknesses can be exploited, you can come up with all kinds of scenarios that would be very natural and appealing to folks in their work in the context of COVID-19 that you could exploit. And as this crisis evolves, those things are going to get more sophisticated and richer, and we are going to be at a higher risk. Business email compromise attacks, particularly because of the change in processes, how we process payments, how we process account approvals. These are now done slightly differently. So getting an email from your IT department that you need to reset your account credentials is more easily perceived as legitimate than in the old paradigm. So these kinds of attacks are being ramped up as well. And you should be aware of that, of course. Medication website phishing. You'll notice here, this is from a few months ago, but the hydroxychloroquine medication website phishing was significant a few months ago, and that was at the top of mind for a lot of people. So as the news comes out with buzzwords or cures or chances of a vaccine under a particular brand name or by a particular organization, immediately the crooks get on that and start sending emails, doing phishing campaigns, targeting in some cases the organizations that are doing the work, trying to exploit the pressure that these folks are under. Yes. An infodemic of fraudulent websites. I think I mentioned this already, but there literally have been hundreds of thousands of new domains registered worldwide, and dealing with those is an ongoing issue. And for a bit of a lighthearted take on this, there was in fact this scheme out, which purported to protect you from the actual coronavirus if you installed this antivirus application on your computer. One would have to be quite daft, I suspect, in order to believe this, but it was out there, so I presume some people believe this kind of stuff and install these things on their computers. Again, of course, just another way to get into your system and steal your stuff. Okay, so that is a bit of an overview of kind of where we are with COVID-19. I hope I've left you with a sense of urgency about the risks that these types of events pose to everyone, and that we need to be vigilant. I don't want to use the word paranoid, but I think George Carlin once said, paranoia is a wonderful thing. You only have to be right once to make it all worthwhile. And that certainly is not untrue in the case of cybersecurity. So let's talk a little bit about working from home securely, or for teaching how students and parents and you yourself and your schools may continue to function in this new environment. Some of this is a bit corporate focused, but hopefully some of it will also resonate with you. So from an organizational perspective, and this is a bit after the fact, I've given this presentation a number of times now, but certainly early on, these were very significant factors to consider. Making sure you have the right hardware available to do the things that you need to do, that your staff need to do remotely. And VPN in particular was a big barrier. Many organizations simply didn't have the bandwidth capabilities for their VPN, and that was the bottleneck. Even though they had laptops and they had the software, when people actually got online, the system couldn't handle the load. Cloud storage options, of course, are a good thing to think about. It's important to have a work from home policy. I think, certainly within the education system, those are things you want to focus on as well. Have you thought about reference materials, resources, guidance for the various players in the system? How should teachers interact with their students? How should parents set up their kids' connectivities? Those kinds of things. Cybersecurity awareness training, of course, very important. I tried to do a little bit of that here today, but letting your participants know about the risks that are out there, particularly for parents and children, that they know the kinds of risks that are out there. Process adaptation, particularly IT support and HR. Make sure that everyone in your organization knows that no one is going to send an email to reset your credentials. No HR person is going to send you an email asking you to provide information about your personal financial portfolio, what have you. That should all be done by phone or some other means that is not at risk of being compromised. If everyone in the organization knows that IT-related account questions are only going to come by way of a Skype message or phone call, or an HR message will only be done by phone. It depends on how large your organization is, of course, but then that gives some boundaries for what is easily discernible as not legitimate. Working from home. So before you go to work from home, have a look at these questions. What do I need? What will be hard to access? How can I fix that? Are my devices up to date? I know I'm getting tight on time here, so I'm going to rush through this a little bit. When you're working from home, make sure you have a space that's undisturbed. Keep other people away from that space. Secure your devices and use that, clean desk paradigm. And make sure you have a pattern that works for both you and the people in your house. Home network, a critical aspect of security. Make sure your router is up to date. This is a critical weakness in many home setups. I'll provide some resources at the end to help you navigate this. But as a first step, make sure you don't have your default admin passwords on your router. Reset those. Change your settings as far as security are concerned. Use a good password. Also consider disabling certain IoT devices. Alexa and Google Home can in certain instances listen to everything. Maybe you're having conversations with students that you may not want to have even listened to by those devices. Now, there isn't a great deal of insight yet on what this risk is, but why would you even bother risking it? You shouldn't have the Alexa in the same room that you're doing your work in my opinion. Put your IoT devices on a separate network. Again, I'll provide some resources on how to do that if you're interested. And make sure that other users on your network aren't putting your work devices at risk. If you have teenagers, lecture them on not going to the nefarious websites, downloading content from torrent sites or streaming from certain sites where malware is prevalent. Malware on a computer on your network puts your other systems on your network at risk. So make sure you take steps to minimize that. Devices, use only work devices for work. Don't mix work and personal. Don't allow other people to use your device. Lock your device when you're not using it, and use a VPN if you have access to it. Communication online, try to verify communications online. Use multiple modalities with people that you have trusting conversations with. Don't just act on a simple email if it's an important issue. Verify it with a chat. Have a screen share, call them on the phone, what have you. Separate, and I can't repeat this enough, separate the personal from the professional. Don't have social media accounts in your professional, using your professional email. Don't check Facebook on your work computer, etc. Video and audio conferencing. We're doing all of this ourselves throughout the day. Take these steps to ensure you're doing it right. Understand what you're working with. Take the time to understand the impacts of certain features and how they affect your users. Make sure your users understand these things. Take a minute before starting a session, if there are people who haven't used it before, to walk through these things with them. And lastly, continue to be proactive and vigilant. Strong passwords, critical. 1 password per account. Use a password manager if you can. And my mantra, stop, look, and think before you click that link. Continue to take a pause whenever you get an email or something with an attachment that you, instinctively feel that you want to respond to. Don't. Take a moment. Make sure you analyze the email. Check it out. Be wary of pretexting. So I'll give you a quick example before I conclude. Someone may call you up on the phone and say, I'm so-and-so. I want to give you some helpful information from this organization. Are you okay if I send that to you? And you say, sure. So you get an email, and now that you have a certain level of trust created by the phone call, with an attachment. And that attachment may very well contain malware. So be sensitive to that. If people are calling you that you don't know, and they send you emails or documents after, be skeptical. High risk stuff, I've mentioned this already, anything to do with financial approvals, accounting, authorizations, double check with your organization to make sure that it's legit and on the up and up. Last slide, my resource page. You can go to the link on the slide here for lots of resources. I've added a COVID-19 section, lots of good stuff there. If you have a phone, you can just take a picture of or just aim your camera at that QR code and it will open up on your phone and you can bookmark it. So with that, that is my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and seeing if there's any questions. I don't know.
There's one question, and it's from Jess, and she says, besides avoiding or protecting Android phones, will devices like Chromebooks help reduce malware? If not, what other devices are better?
Yeah, a Chromebook is certainly a good option. Chromebook has some good protections built in. But really, it really comes down to the user in each case. Any good device, no matter how well protected or hardened, if you have someone who doesn't know the basics of cybersecurity, protection can compromise that device in no time. So it really comes down to the people. The number one risk with all of this is just people not knowing enough about good practices, cyber hygiene and those kinds of things. But look, if you were to ask me what devices are better than others, I'm a big Mac user. I tend to think that Mac computers are slightly safer than Windows machines just because of the prevalence of malware out there. And that is not to say that you shouldn't be as diligent and as prudent with a Mac, but I think there's a certain amount of protection you get out of the box with a Mac computer that you don't get with a Windows machine. A Google Chromebook is also a very good option, good protections in there. The Google ecosystem is certainly very good. And if you're just using Gmail for your personal accounts, Gmail does very aggressive AV filtering and will sort out a lot of the garbage. That's not to say something doesn't get through, but you're going to have a good deal of out of the box protection with those devices.
Awesome.
Any other questions?
There don't seem to be any now, but thank you for the great presentation and the good information. We'll share out your slide deck with everybody with the conference materials, and hopefully you don't get as much snow up in Quebec as we're predicted to get down here.
Yes. Well, we'll see. Hey, it is what it is. We can't change it. We just have to take it as it comes.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. And maybe next year we'll do it in person if you see fit to ask me to come again.
Yes.
All right. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. So we have a break until 11 o'clock, and then we'll be joined by Chris Lee for the investment perspective and burning questions. So please continue to send any questions.